So this is a talk called How to Unblock Yourself with Elm. And it kind of comes from a personal motto that I kind of have, which is, if it makes sense to do it in Elm, we can do it in Elm. And this is generally going to focus on production systems. So you shouldn't necessarily just put everything in a package just because you can. But if you're making a website and you need it to work, then this is kind of going to show you how to go about thinking about that. So there's three main categories of things that I see that block people in Elm. The first one being upstream issues. So something in upstream that someone says they need but isn't implemented, that they don't necessarily need, but they say they do. Unfamiliarity with the modeling. So if you come from JS, then you might be more familiar with modeling your problems in a way that suits JS. So you like having a JSON object, and you just stuff everything into there and pull things out whenever you want and change it whenever you want. Obviously, that's quite different in Elm. And fear of committing. So a lot of beginners have this struggle where they don't want to make any kind of anything because they just see anything that they might write down as there forever. And that's not necessarily true. Sometimes it might be, but where should I put this? So we like to imagine that applications in general all these nice thought-out things that fit together really nicely, and they all kind of look and work in a similar kind of way, and they're kind of uniform, and they all interact with each other and sit on top of each other really nicely. And in reality, what we have is something more like this. So we might have pieces of JS in there, or CoffeeScript, or Haml, or any kind of templating in HTML with some Elm, all mixed together to hold up our users and hold up our site. And this kind of approach isn't really recommended. You can do it if you want, but it's a lot nicer in Elm if we focus on keeping the Elm parts together and the other parts kind of on the edges. So we have a big solid block of Elm code, and it interacts with our CoffeeScript or JavaScript just on the edges and not everywhere. So when you're thinking about how to make one of these pieces, one of these things that fit into your whole application, then you might get kind of confused, like, how do I go about thinking about that? Don't I need the whole application to see how something might fit in? The answer is probably yes, you do, and that's why we refactor. But before you start even writing any code, there's some simple questions that you can ask yourself. So these are questions that I like to ask myself. So what are we trying to do? Is it something that we are trying to achieve? What have we been told by our bosses that we need to do? Are there any important features? Like, is there any particular edge cases that we've been told about by the designer where we need to display a certain state, a certain visualization for a certain state? And can we write an example of usage? So my favorite thing is to write example usage because then I can see how it fits in with everything else. But it's important to answer the first two questions first. So here's some example. We're making a regex search for a text editor. So we're going to make a big text editor, and it's going to allow you to edit code. And you want your users to be able to enter their regex to highlight whatever they're looking for and maybe even find replace. So one of the important features from that is that we take the regexes from the users. We don't have it at compile time. We don't have it before anything else. We have to bring it in, and then we have to validate it and show an error if we have an invalid regex. If a valid regex doesn't produce any matches, then we want to say, hey, we didn't find anything. But if we did find matches, then we want to show those. And from there, we can kind of make a first pass example. Now, this code isn't intended to be great. It isn't even intended to be good. It isn't even intended to be passable. It's just meant to be some code that fits in with what you're trying to do. You don't have to worry about getting it right the first time. And our model has two fields. The regex itself, which comes in from a user. So we have this update regex function, which will just create a new regex from the string that we pass in. And then we're also going to store isValidRegex on the model. We're also going to flesh out just the type signature for a function called isValidRegex, which takes a string and returns a Boolean. We don't care about the implementation detail. What we care about is how we use this and how this fits in with the rest of our application. And obviously, we didn't take care of the state where we might not have a regex. So on page load, we might not have a regex. If a regex isn't valid, we might not have a regex. So we're just going to change that to a maybe. And obviously, change the code in the update. It's weird. I pointed that there, and I expected it to show up on the screen, which is ridiculous. But and then we realized that maybe can store two states, just like a Boolean. And so we can actually just drop the Boolean completely and just store a model where we have a regex, where if it's valid, it's stored in the model. Otherwise, we have nothing. And at this point, we go back to our original spec and realize, wait, we're missing one piece that we were told from the designer. And these are the three cases that we were told we needed to implement. So the first one is if we enter a regex and we don't find any matches, then we need to tell the user we didn't find any matches. So we've covered that because we have a regex. And then we want the case where the regex does find things, and we want to highlight whatever is in the text. And the final state that we're missing is actually we want to see the error when we enter an invalid regex. And, well, we can change our API to look something a bit more like this. We're going to change regex from being just a maybe, so it's no longer just either a regex or nothing. It's now a result where we store the error if it's an invalid regex. And if it's not an invalid regex, then we store it as a just whatever regex is. And if we didn't get a regex yet, then it's nothing. So here we cover all three possible states. And the API for this looks, type signature looks pretty decent. It also simplified our update regex code quite a bit. But there's a little problem with that. And this is one that I've seen people run into in production. There is no function in Elm's core libraries for validating regexes. Yeah. And just to demonstrate why this is kind of icky right now, if we have this example update code where we take in a message which has only one possible constructor, which is new regex, and then we just create the new regex without validating it at all, then we can see that it shows up OK if it's just characters. But if I open a character set, nothing shows up anymore. And just to show you what happened there, oops, I'm going to enable errors. And that's what happened. So this is a runtime error that happened. It crashed the Elm application. And that's why nothing else was showing up anymore, because none of the events were getting to Elm. And if I restart Elm out now. So then you might say, well, Elm won't work for this problem. I can't use Elm. I'm going to have to rewrite all my text editor in JavaScript because I need this one piece. And you might then think, but I really want to use Elm. And there's a couple paths that you can take at this point, but there's only one which I can really approve of. Use the community. So if you go to Elm Slack and you post this exact thing, they will be able to help you. If you go to Reddit, there's a weekly thread for beginners or people who just have questions or things they're stuck on, and you can post there and people will help. And the same goes for Elm Discuss. And what they will ask you is, what are you trying to do? What are the important features? Can you write an example? And these are the exact same questions that we asked ourselves when we started to look at implementing this. And just to give you a couple of examples of 2 different ways you can ask this question. A bad way to ask is, making an invalid regex breaks my app and now I can't work. That is a bad way to ask the question. A good way to ask the question is, I'm trying to make a regex search for an editor. I'd like to display the error if the regex is invalid. However, when I use this code, blah, 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 I get a runtime error. And what they will tell you is probably this, I hope so, is to use ports. And the basic solution using ports is that now we have an outgoing port where we just send the string that we want to validate, and then the incoming port where we send back in this, a tuple of the string that we got from Elm, and whether it was valid or not. And then in JS, we're just going to have this little function, and all it's going to do is wrap making a regex in a try-catch block, and then return the regex with whether it's true or false, whether it's valid or not. And now we have a nice big stone. So it doesn't quite fit in with our Elm pieces. It doesn't look like the rest of our Elm code. And it wasn't what we wanted originally. And that's kind of where this comes in. We actually wanted this. We wanted a nice brick that would fit in and look and behave like the rest of our Elm functions and code. Well, the problem that we have, we can figure out by looking at our original model and the new port wave that we're doing it. And we can actually see that they have 2 very similar problems. And that's that the state is duplicated between 2 different fields. So in this case, we have a string and a Boolean coming back into Elm. And in this case, we have a string which is converted into a regex and a Boolean inside Elm. And they are extremely similar to what we originally started with. I mean, that is what we started with. But if we then take a look at the best solution that we came up with, where the regex was a result with a string for the error and the regex if it's valid, I forgot the maybe, but I'll put it in later, then we can actually implement a similar thing using ports. So we're still going to send the regex string out of Elm, but what we're going to send into Elm is a result. Now, this syntax here isn't actually valid. You can't actually send results like that into Elm. Or, well, you can, but this is one way of doing it. So you change your function to now return an object. And the object is going to have one single key, and it's either going to be OK or error. And if it's OK, then the value of that key is going to be the regex as a string. And if it's an error, it's going to be the error message that you got. And then inside Elm, we're going to write a decoder. And the decoder is going to look for these 2 fields. So if we have an OK field, then we're going to decode the regex string and then wrap it in an OK. And if we got an error field, then we're going to do the same but for error. And then we're going to subscribe to it. This looks more fancy than it should, but yeah. And all this is basically doing is saying, OK, listen to is valid regex. When we get the data in, decode the value with the decode regex. If it's valid, then we're actually going to change it to this is valid regex thing, which we can then send to update. Otherwise, we're going to have a no-op. What we're probably going to actually want is to capture the decoding error and log it somewhere, but that's out of the scope for this question. So here's an example of it working. You can see I just typed everything, and it showed when there was no matches. If I type something that does match, for example, hello or maybe why not all of it, or why not all of it and then a space. Then it highlights the pieces that matched. And then now if I enter an invalid regular expression, we get the error back from JavaScript. So that's pretty easy to do. So we identified what we wanted to do by first examining what we were trying to make and the context of what we were trying to make. We then created examples based on that. We found the API that would cover all the edge cases, so we didn't just have a maybe, regex, or nothing. We had something that was actually a result. And when we got stuck, we consulted the community by communicating in a friendly way. And we then implemented the working solution, and then we refactored that working solution until we got something that matched our original example. And a couple of things that I'm just going to leave you with. An open statement is that if you join the Elm Slack and you have a question, it will never go unanswered. And if it does, ping me and I will answer it.